R12 Stencils, and today we're going to show you how to paint faux stone on your plant pots with stencils. Studio R12 is a stencil company, so we like to stencil on all the things. We typically stencil on wood, but we like to see what other things we can stencil on. So a lot of times when we go shopping, we just pick up random things. We got this stone flower pot from Ikea and wanted to see what we could stencil on it. We've had it for a while. We couldn't just find the right thing until we made this awesome river rock stencil. We live in a river town and couldn't believe we didn't have this already in our stencil collection, and we cannot wait to see what we can do with it. Now, as you're getting started, there is a little bit of prep that you're going to want to do before you stencil on something that isn't wood. First and foremost, you're going to want to set up a secure area for something that is round and wobbly. You can use a shirt, you can use a pillow. We are using one of our Studio R12 aprons, and we put a couple of sanding blocks to the sides of it just to keep it steady. Now, if you only have one of these, you're also going to want to practice, because practice makes perfect and you don't want to mess up if you only have one. We spent a lot of time on this project doing practice. We did research, we did colors, we did a couple different backgrounds just to see what would work so that we came into this with a plan. Now, since this is stone, it did have a little bit of a texture to it before we're getting started. So we took a really light grit sandpaper and rubbed it over top of our stone just to get rid of a little bit of the texture before we're starting to paint. This will make the stencil go on smoother, and it will help your paint look smoother once we get it on there. There's one more thing. Since this is a round surface and we are using a flat stencil, you are going to tape this on, and once you tape it on, there is a chance that it could lift a little bit due to the shape. So we prepped our stencil with the Aleene's stick and re-stick. This will make the stencil sticky, and it just adds a little bit to it so that it will stick to your surface in the little nooks and crannies without rising. So even though we put the stick and re-stick on, due to the shape of the surface, we also decided to go ahead and tape down the edges and make it as tight as possible so that the stencil would have no wiggle room while we painted. So we talked about practicing for this project. There's also a little bit of research that goes into a project like this. We were trying to figure out what colors we could use that would be the most real, natural looking for river rock. We went to Google, we looked up a river rock, we went to the images and found a color palette that we loved, that looked natural. We picked some highlights and lowlights and a couple different colors to add in, and we can't wait for you guys to see what it looks like. We're going to use a couple techniques with our dome brush today. We are going to dry brush, meaning we are not adding any water to our brush or our paint. We are also going to dirty brush, which means we are going to go color by color without changing our brush. And so this is really beneficial if you have a minimal amount of brushes. It's something that you want to consider. If you're going to be staying in the same color family, then you can start and go light to dark and use the same brush without wiping them off. So when we start painting, we're going to start with the color that is closest to our flower pot. We're going to put the paint on our brush, and just like with a normal project, we are going to offload onto our palette paper, and then we are just going to start swirling. And the beauty of this project is that you can pick and choose where you go. There is no right, there is no wrong. We are still holding down the stencil just a little bit, just on the curves, to make sure that the brush does not go under the stencil so we don't have bleeding under. And the goal here is to have a really light dusting of paint. We don't want an area that is going to be really bright and big and bold, because we are going to stencil over this when we are done. So we're just going here and there. Patty likes to call this dancing. We're just dancing around with our brush picking different places, not really having any rhyme or reason, but just starting to add a little bit of color. So now that we have our base color put down on a few of these stones, we are going to go into our darker color next, and we are going to wipe off in the same area so that we have a little bit of light and a little bit of dark mixing in together. And then with our dark color, we're going to start working on shadows. So as we were looking at the pictures, and we started seeing some natural light shadows on some of the stones. Some were on the top, some were on the bottom. So we're just going to go around our project and continue to add some color. So as we're starting to get some color on our project, we're going back and forth from the darker color to the light, just to add a little bit of low tones, a little bit of higher tones, a little bit of shadows to our stones. Okay, are you ready for a little bit of a sneak peek just to see what our stones are looking like so far? We're gonna peel off this tape. I did a really good job of taping that down. And take a look at that. So you can see we already start to have a little bit of a stone pattern. And where we put this stencil down, we had some room at the top and some room at the bottom so that we would have stone all across our project. So we have a little bit of an overlap here. And the cool thing about this stencil is that it repeats. So as you're doing this project, we have the biggest size here. We also have a couple of smaller sizes, and you can see that the stones are small on the small stencils, and then they gradually get larger as the stencil gets larger. So depending on what size flower pot or whatever you're using this for, you can choose the stencil that will have the best stones for your project. So now we're going to go into our light color, and we're going to start adding a little bit of highlights. We're still offloading onto our paper towel in the same place so that we're staying in that same color family. We still have a little bit of the dark, a little bit of the light mixed in, and now you can choose where you want your highlights. And again, something I love about this project, I am a recovering perfectionist, and so this project is nice because there's really no right and wrong. And that's why we love projects like this, just to give you guys some ideas of different things that you can do with stencils. So I did go in with the lighter color and make a couple here and there a much lighter color than the rest. So we'll add those, and then now it's time to start going into our black. So we're going to go into our dark color. We're still wiping off in the same place. So then it starts to become a more of a dark gray than a black. Then we're going to come back in and go opposite of where we just painted. So wherever we didn't put the light color, we're going to go through and start blending our dark color in to show the opposite side of that lighting with the darker shadows. So when it comes to the brush technique here, we're doing a little bit of a swirl motion, and we're also doing a little bit of just like a coloring where we're just going back and forth. And you can also even add a little stippling to add some texture if you want to add texture to the surface here. And now I'm going to go into the black and put it off here a little bit to the side so I can get an even darker color. We'll add black paint to it twice, so then it's going to be even darker, and just go along those edges of those spots that we want to add the shadow to. So then it has just a little bit of a darker tone on the edges. I hope you're anticipating the reveal of this, because I am too. Okay, we, I think, are ready to do reveal just to see where we are and where we might want to add and change some of the colors. All right, let's see. Ah, look how cool that looks. So we have our stones and they're starting to take some color. We're starting to see some highlights and some lowlights and some shadows. And then now we're going to continue to do our blending so that you can't really see as many strokes. We're going to go back in here and just kind of blend and color through. And then we're going to add a couple of more colors to this. So when we were doing our research, we saw that some of them had a brownish tone, and then some of them had even a little bit of like a navy tone as well. So we're going to come into we grabbed a yellow and grabbed a brown, and we're just going to mix our paint on our palette, take a swoop of each of them, and then come over to our paper towel and swipe off. I still want it to be a little more golden than what it is. There we go. And then we're just going to come into some of these and just add a really light, almost a feather, where I'm hardly even putting my brush on this, and just adding it in between the area where the light goes to dark and where the shadow comes through. So this is really about personal preference. When you're going, there's no right and wrong. You can paint your stones the color that you wish. You can add more yellow, you can add more dark, you can make them pop a little more, and you can just keep adding your paint on and mixing until you get the colors that you like. Now I will let you know that if you have too much paint, you might start to see a lifting. So if you are working on the same stone over and over and over and over again and you're not letting it dry, you might start to notice that it looks like a hole. And so what that means is that it just needs a little bit of time to dry. Go to another stone, start working on it, and then you can come back once that gets dry. So I have a spot that got a little too much yellow in it. So I'm going to continue with my brush and get back into my browns or my grays and come back over top of this and just feather it out a little bit to smooth that yellow out and get a little bit more back to our neutral color. So if you're doing this and you feel that it still has a little too much yellow, right now we're kind of getting to where we're putting too much paint on. Now we can go into a new brush. We can grab a new brush, go back into our neutral colors, and then start fresh. So I can stipple here a little bit, and then you can see that yellow slowly is starting to neutralize a little bit more. Now we're going to go into our navy, our blue, and we're going to add a little bit of black to our blue, just so that we don't have a shocking blue on our project. So we added a little black to our blue. Come over here and wipe off, and then just do a little swipe in the areas that are our darkest areas of our rocks. And this is just going to give us a little bit extra tone, a little bit extra color and pop to our rocks. Okay, let's check it out and see how we like it and where we might want to do a little bit more work. All right, look at that. That is so cool. We do have a couple of the ones that I did that were really light that are maybe a little bit too light. So I think that I'm going to come back here and darken those a little bit. Now, one thing that you are going to want to keep your eye on is if you get a little too much paint on your brush, that there's a chance that you can start to have some ridges. So there are a couple things. Now, you guys, I'm trying this right along with you. You can come through and sand through it. So sanding through this looks like it does a little bit of lines through the paint, but isn't really getting rid of the paint. So now we can check with one of our other tools, our click eraser. So how our click eraser works on wood projects is that if you put a little water on it, you can come through and erase the paint. Now it might have had a little bit too much time there because that's always a factor, but it looks like it's coming off just a little bit for us. So looks like the click eraser can still work here, but feel free to try different things and along the way if you're not liking something. All right, so I'm going to put this back on and just make a few minor fixes and then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, so we have our stones just how we want them. We're not going to show you quite yet because we have one more thing that we are going to add. It's one of our favorite things to add to our stencil projects, and that is spatter. When we were looking at the stones, that a lot of them had a little spatter on them and a little speckle, so we decided that we could do that here with our spatter. So we're going to use our favorite spatter brush. This is called the White Wonder, and you can get it on StudioR12.com. And to spatter, we're going to do something that we typically don't recommend while stenciling, and that is to wet your brush, and then we're also going to wet our paint. So we're going to bring our wet brush into our paint, swish it around. Now I will say that spatter takes a pretty specific consistency. If you have too much water, your spatter droplets are going to be ginormous. If you don't have enough water, then your spatter is going to be really tiny. So we like to add a little water and then just kind of drag in the paint. You do not want to spatter around anything that you love. Spatter goes everywhere. It's been on shoes, on purses. It's been up on the TVs and the ceiling in our studio. It literally goes everywhere. I may have gotten it on Patty's iPad when I was practicing today. So the trick to spattering, we have our water in our paint. It's kind of an inky consistency. You're always going to want to practice. So we're going to bring our guide brush over to our palette, and then you hit your spatter brush on top of the guide brush so you can see what your spatters are going to look like. I'm really happy with that consistency. So now we're going to go over here, and this is something that is going to take a little bit of practice and something that you want to practice on your other board after you get your stones painted. We want the light spatter to be in the light areas. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I guarantee mine's not going to be, but we want our light spatter to be where we put our highlights, and then we're going to put a darker spatter where we have the low lights. So something that you will want to be careful of when you are spattering on a round surface is that if your spatters are too big, there is a chance they will roll down. So you'll want to do it in one area and get it nice and dry, and then roll your surface and move to another area. All right, so I think that we are about good on our light spatters. It's also a little harder to direct where those spatters go with the curved surface, so it's another good reason to do it in one area. So my paint started going down my brush as it was angled. So I have a really large area over here. So I'm going to grab a little bit of water on my paper towel and just kind of dab that up, let it just soak right in, and you can wipe it off. And then if all else fails, then you can go back with your original paint and repaint over that. So we have our light spatter. I'm going to wash off my brush. and get my off-white paint off of there. And then we are going to do the same thing with our black paint. We're going to get our brush nice and wet and come into our black paint. You can see that this is kind of becoming a little bit gray because I didn't wash out my brush perfectly, but that's okay because our surface is gray. So now we're getting a nice inky consistency with our black paint, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to practice over here. See, this one's getting a little wild on us. I'm going to smush some off. And don't be afraid to spatter. I was afraid to spatter. I'll be the first one to tell you that. But it just takes practice to get the right consistency with your paint and with your hand and with your brush. One thing that you can do with your guide brush, and this is also something that takes practice, is you can lay your guide brush down and then spatter, and then once your guide brush is down, that will help you get it exactly where you want it. Kind of becomes addicting after a while. Okay, so we have our spattering done here on the top. We are going to let this dry and then turn it over and finish the side that we didn't spatter. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is spatter takes a long time to dry. It is just a wet glob of paint on your project. So if you are spattering through your stencil, which means that that's what we did, the spatter just goes where your stencil is, you are going to want to wait until this is completely dry before you remove your stencil. If you try to remove your stencil while your spatter is still wet, there's a chance that you will pool the paint and make a mess. Okay, so our spatter is dry. It actually didn't take as long as what we thought it would. The stone is really porous, so it sucked that paint right in and actually dried really quick, which I'm very thankful for because I cannot wait to see this. Are you ready for the big reveal? We are going to peel up our tape. I'll tell you what, the tape is the MVP today because this is nice and stuck on here, and voila. Yay, that looks so cool. Check that out. Can you guys believe all the amazing things that we can do with stencils? We have our stone, we have our lowlights, we have our highlights, we have our spatter, we have all the things, but we're not done. We are not stopping there. On this portion, we are actually going to stencil over top of it. We went through our garden selection and grabbed one of my favorite garden stencils that says "Grow Damn It," and we are going to paint this on top of our flower pot. But we're not just going to stencil it, we are going to give you a quick lesson in drop shadow. So we're going to once again grab our tape. You can do the lining up of your stencil a couple of different ways. You can be very professional about it and use our T-square, which is a ruler device, or you can eyeball it. So we're eyeballing this, and I'm going to tape in two sides. Actually, we are probably going to want to tape down all four corners just because we have the round surface to prevent any extra lifting of the stencil. And then as we are going around with our paint, we will also want to hold down the stencil. This G here would actually probably serve very well to put the stick and re-stick behind it just to keep that portion down. Okay, so there are a couple different ways to drop shadow. We have a whole playlist on drop shadowing. I will share that above. Today, what we're going to do is a 3-part drop shadow. We have the stencil lined up exactly where we want the main location to be. So we are going to start with what would be our main color, which is going to be black here. we're going to offload our brush very well and then come over to our stencil and swirl a really light layer of the black over our lettering, being very careful of those areas of that stencil that are wanting to come up because of the round surface. So what this does is it gives us a guide point so that when we go to move the stencil to put down our actual drop shadow color, that we know where to line it back up. So here we have our base point. We're going to put our stencil over that, and then you can do your drop shadow whichever location that you like. I like to go down and to the right, and then we are going to tape this right back on, making sure that our stencil is nice and smooth. And then we're going to come into our second color, which is going to be the gold. And what the gold will do, will kind of bring in the gold from the tones that we added in to our stones and bring that in all together. So when we are doing our drop shadow, we like to use a stipple for that bottom coat because it gives a lot more coverage quicker. You can also swirl here. It's really personal preference. I like to stipple to get more done quickly. And then with the stippling, you don't typically have to do as many coats. So for this quick drop shadow, I will do 2 coats of the yellow and then be able to go back to the black. So we have yellow for our top set of words. We have off-white for our bottom set of words. I am going to use the blow dryer on this very quickly. When you stipple, there's a lot more paint. It does take a longer time to dry, but you want to make sure it's really good and dry before you move that stencil back up to that original location. Okay, so now we're going to remove the tape, and we're going to have what's going to look like a reverse drop shadow, and we're going to move the stencil back up to where the original black paint was. I'm going to load the black paint onto our brush, and once again I'm going to do the stippling because we are wanting to cover quite a bit of paint here. We're going to cover the yellow with our black, and this will just do it nice and quick. You do want to make sure that you are still offloading your brush onto your paper towel before you come back into your stenciling, because when you are stippling, you're putting a lot more pressure on your project than when you're swirling, and there is a greater chance of bleeding under when you stipple compared to when you swirl. And we're still holding down some of those letters that might want to get a little bit of movement in them due to the curve of our surface. Are you as ready for the big reveal as I am? We ended up doing 3 layers of the black over top of our gold paint because we really wanted to make it pop. So let's take this off, and oh, it looks so good. We did yellow on the top, we did white on the bottom. We're gonna throw our plant in here. And check that out. How cool is that? Now this is a project that you will want to varnish. We recommend using the DuraClear matte varnish, and not only varnishing the outside of the stone pot, but also the inside, and that is to protect it from the water. If you are going to use your soil and plant your plant right inside of here, when you water it, the water is going to want to come out through the stone, which could damage your painting. So there are a couple options. You're going to seal it, and then after that, you can grab one of the little plastic plates and put it in your pot, and then put your plant inside of that, so that when you water the plant, the water goes into the little plastic tray and doesn't seep through your stone. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, be sure to subscribe to the Studio R12 Stencils YouTube channel and ring the bell so you can be notified anytime we add new tips, tricks, and tutorials.